Alrighty guys, so now we're on to 4.2, and this was our rules of exponents, right? So first thing we need to know is what is an exponent? Well, an exponent is when I have some number, we're going to call it x, and it's raised to a power, right? This y is my exponent, okay? So a classic example is x squared. What does that mean? What does x squared mean? Well, what it means is just like 2x is repeated addition where it's x plus x, this is repeated multiplication. So it's x times x. Okay? And that's the basics of what an exponent is. Next, we need to know what are terms, right? So terms are divided up by addition and subtraction. So if I have something like 3 plus 4 plus 5, right? I currently have 3 terms in this equation. I have 3, I have 4, and I have 5. But if I were to have 3 times 4 times 5, that is only one term, okay? Next, we need to talk about like terms. So what like terms are, so we have this x is known as our base, and this is our power, right? To be a like term, you have to have same base and same power. So for example, x squared plus x squared are like terms. They're both base x, power 2. X squared plus x cubed are not. I can't do anything with them. They cannot be combined. They are not like terms. Though both the bases are x, the powers are different. So if I ask for a final answer, this would be a final answer. Just like if I were to have 2 plus x, I can't do anything, right? My bases are different. I have 2 and I have x. So that's it. You're just done. So now that we know what like terms are, a base and a power, there's rules that go to that, right? First things first is you can only combine like terms. So I just went over that saying how you cannot add x squared plus x cubed, but I could add x squared plus x squared. And that will just give me simply 2x squared. And when you have variables, the rules is you just add the coefficients if they are like terms. So they are like terms. My coefficient on both of these is 1. So x squared plus x squared becomes 2x squared. Next is called the product rule. And what the product rule states is when you multiply two terms or two things, you add their exponents. So for example, x times x equals x squared. Okay? Anything that is itself is raised to the power of 1, right? So x to the 1 is just x times x to the 1 equals x squared. And I figure that out is when I multiply, I add the powers. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. So if I were to have, let's say, x to the 3rd times x to the 4th, my answer would be 1. So hopefully you kept like terms, or like bases, added them together, and you get x to the 7th. Okay? This continues to apply though. What if they're different bases, right? So what if I have x squared times y? Well, now we have different bases. But this is still only one term because there's no addition or subtraction in between them. So I just multiply straight across. X squared times y becomes x squared y. And that's it, I'm done. X squared keeps its power, y keeps its power, you just combine them, okay? Now if you're asking, why does that work? Why am I able to do that? So, x squared times x to the third. If we add them, we can see that it's x to the fifth. How do we know that works? Well, x squared, we said, is really just x times x. Then we have multiplication, and then x cubed would be x times x times x. So we count. X times x times x times x times x is just x to the fifth. And that's the proof on how that works. Okay? Next, we have the quotient rule. Okay? So now if I divide and I have the same base, I subtract. So if I have x cubed divided by x squared, because they're the same base, I just subtract. So this would become x. And again, we can think of it, x times x times x all over x times x. This x cancels out this x cancels out this x. I'm left with x over 1, which is really x. So the trick, when dividing, subtract. When multiplying, add. Next, about the power rule. And what that's saying is x squared raised to a power. And let's just say 3, okay? So what this is saying is really x squared times x squared times x squared, right? Because raising something to a power is really just repeated multiplication. So x squared times x squared times x squared equals x to the 6th. And the shortcut here is when you have a power raised to a power, you multiply. So 2 times 3, x to the 6th. They're the same, my math checks out. Next, I have the power of fractions. So what I do here is, let's say I have x over y, that whole fraction raised to the 3rd power. Well, that just becomes x to the 3rd over y to the 3rd. Again, to prove it, this is repeated multiplication, right? So I have x over y times x over y times x over y. When we multiply fractions, we multiply straight across. So I end up with x times x times x, which is x to the 3rd, over y times y times y, y to the 3rd. Next, I have the 0 exponent, and this says anything to the 0 power is equal to 1. So it doesn't matter if it's x, if it's 100, if it's 0. Anything to the 0 power is 1. Okay? Next, I have the negative exponent rule. So let's say I have x to some negative power, negative 2, right? All that means is it's in the bottom of a fraction. So this is really equal to 1 over x squared, okay? And think about it when we go back to the quotient rule, right? We had x cubed divided by x squared, but we can rewrite that as x cubed over x squared. And I said when you do this, you subtract. So can we see how this is really x to the 3 minus x to the, or times x to the negative 2, right? So when you have a negative power, it just becomes the absolute value of that power under 1. Unless I would have something like y times x to the negative 2, that would become y over x squared, because the power of my y is 1. Okay? And finally, we have the fraction rule. And what this says is, let's say I have x to the 1/2. This is then going to become a root. So this is equal to the square root of x. Okay? Whatever is in the bottom is my root. Whatever is in the top is the power. So let's say I would have x to the 2/3. Well, that would become, the cubed root of x squared. My numerator is my power of x. My denominator is the power of my root. And that's really it for exponent rules. I can show you with some numbers. So let's say I have 2 squared equals 4, right? But if I have 2 cubed times 2 to the 4th, that's really 2 to the 7th, okay? And then if I wanted to figure that out, we did 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, it's 2 times 2 times 2, again get 4 times 4 times 4 times 2, 16 times 4 times 2, 64 times 2, and that's going to equal 120. Alright? So these are all the exponent rules down to their bare basics. Just remember base, power, and like terms. Those are your 3 key things. And then just remember all the different rules we went over. So hopefully this helps.